We are crossing the Nerdverse, bringing you yet another rift in the Nerdverse. For those of you that don't know, a rift in the Nerdverse is breaking news that we have going on in some aspect of the Nerdverse. So, Eric, I believe you're going to be leading this one off again as well. What you got for us?
Yeah, so I was checking out the releases and stuff like that and kind of looking at upcoming games and stuff, and one of the things I saw was Hogwarts. As we all know, it was originally delayed. Nothing crazy like some of the games going on right now, but it still had its delay. And finally is releasing, and people are testing and reviewing it, and putting out the reviews on the game. And in those reviews, a lot of it is positive, especially if you're a big Harry Potter buff. So they definitely played to the fan base. Not to say it doesn't sound like it's going to be good, but they played into the fan base a little bit with it.
Know your audience.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when it's that big. But it came out with a couple glitches, like delays and like frame rate, stuff like that. The field of view, just small things, nothing Cyberpunk or Fallout 76 related. Kind of small things on its own, and it just got me thinking as to the state of the AAA video game release and how everything is either delayed and still coming out with bugs, usually worse than Hogwarts. I will give Hogwarts credit. It's not that bad off. Or it's just coming out just completely bugged. And I think that's something that definitely needs to be talked about with AAA titles.
I definitely think there's a myriad of problems in regards to AAA titles coming out. The big one is how hyped the studio has made the game and how expectations for gaming releases just keep getting higher and higher and higher. At some point, there's got to be a cap on what we can possibly expect a gaming studio to do in a reasonable amount of time without constantly having to rework every time new hardware comes out, because it's been a big one where games have been in development to the point where new hardware is coming out. Well, now we've got to go back down and upgrade from the bottom up to get it ready for the next console release.
Well, in a lot of these delays and the stuff that we get, it's going to fall back on your train of thought, your personal feelings on the matter, because it's become very controversial and almost a dirty word to say things like pre-order. These AAA titles, we just did an episode on the podcast, which for those of you that are viewing podcast Crossing the Nerdverse, we just did a whole segment on indie gaming. Go check it out. But pre-ordering a game has become a very divisive topic amongst gamers, because we've had so many games that were well advertised, that were hyped up, and that many fans, especially fans of particular franchises, were ecstatic about and super excited about. And then the game releases and it's so buggy or so broken that it's almost unplayable. You're talking the big three in my mind, obviously, are going to be Cyberpunk 2077. That had a horrible release. Fallout 76, horrible release. And Mass Effect Andromeda, which was several years ago at this point, came out buggy. Sorry, go ahead, Travis.
Honorable mention to Anthem.
Well, and that's where we get into some of the more divisive topics. Do you want to pre-order a game or not? And games have all manner of incentives when it comes to pre-ordering a game. You get this bonus gear, this cool skin, this whatever the case may be. And now it seems like a lot of our AAA titles are starting to hit that realm where either they release on time, but the game is more or less empty. Referring to Eric and the article he was talking about with the Hogwarts Legacy release. Anthem was one I was so unbelievably excited about. I was so ready for Anthem. It felt like it was going to be the next Titanfall. And then it came out and the worlds were not viable. They were empty. There were glitches. And so it really got the worst of everything, because either the game will come out and it works fine, but it's empty, or the game comes out and it is so bugged and so unplayable that people feel like they were robbed. And so when that started becoming such a prevalent thing and a joke in the community that people were no longer pre-ordering, they were no longer spending their money, and instead were taking the route of the indie game early access road over pre-ordering AAA games, the game companies decided that they needed to do something different, and that's where we get these delays. And so I know I, for one, and I speak for only a section of the community, I've always said I will always want a game to be delayed and come out finished and ready to play over give it to me on some deadline set by some corporate punk and have it be unplayable.
Yeah, I think studios need to just probably get on a better page in regards to that. Like if you read into like Cyberpunk and Fallout, from what I had read, like it seemed more that the people making the game said it wasn't a realistic timeline, but the up top people saying, well, this is what we're going to do and what we're going to say to kind of get people. So I think Cyberpunk honestly had the biggest impact on like last episode and this episode talking about things because of how bad its launch was. I mean, just look at some of the games that have been late. Like last year had the most delayed games at least in the last few years, possibly ever for the gaming industry. Last of Us for PC, that game came out like eons ago for PlayStation, but seems like they're so nervous if it's not polished enough, people are going to complain or be upset or something's going to happen. Like, a lot of games, like it's this polished stuff. Supposedly Jedi Survivor, is done, but it needs polish. It's getting weird and wonky.
See, I'll give them a 6-week finish out. That's fine. If it's minor issues that just need to be day zero patched is what I'd call that, given how close we were to actual launch when they pushed it out. I'm not going to fault them for that. Give me a finished product. My big issue is when they announce a game 5-6 years in development. Don't tell me about it. Give me 6 months to a year to get hyped up. Like, once you start hitting the alpha and beta test, tell me about the game. That's my biggest problem, because then when you do have those delays, it's not quite so devastating. Again, this is just my personal opinion on it, but everybody wants to have these explosions about delays in games, and I'm like, well, one, we're asking for a lot as a gaming community, in my opinion. We expect studios to render every blade of grass individually, and their shadow should move, and like dewdrops should reflect the light in a particular way. And it's just become this sort of expected benchmark as it's going on. And I'm willing to sacrifice graphics, even animation style. I could have like crummier animation if you give me a good, compelling story, decent voice acting, and be mechanically complete. Those are my big three issues, you know. I don't expect the moon every single time. Now, if you're making a very artistic game, yes, sink the time and effort into that vibrant, like very punchy style graphics where it hits you and the art is part of it. So I can kind of understand, but yeah, I'm not going to be super salty to give them an extra few weeks just to finish some odds and ends.
I think when you start talking graphics and stuff, though, it comes down to what kind of game it is, as to what you hyped it up to. Like for me, like Star Wars, the one that's coming out, graphics are not as important as just making sure the story's tight, and that's because it's falling into such a rich history. Even though it's not playing into like the Luke or Rey's or anything like that, it is still part of a rich history. So the story to that is a little bit more important. If the graphics take a hit, you won't mind. But now when you look at other games, like if I play a fighter game, I'm trying to think of a good one, Dragon Ball Z Fighters, I want the graphics to that to be outstanding. The animations need to make my eyes pop out of my head, because that's what Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball in general has always been, is the flashy fighting, the powering up, the Kamehameha waves and all that stuff. So I really think whatever game you're making, you have to look at what's been done, and kind of like multiple aspects to it, and then make your promises based off of that. If you know it's graphics, things like that, you're probably going to have to push your timeline. Don't be so crazy. But if you know like Star Wars is generally more of a story based game, your timeline is doesn't have to be as crazy, because if it's good enough, the little polishy things and stuff you're not going to pay as much attention to as if there's some overwhelming gap in the story, or if like the voice acting is horrible or something like that. So,
well, and I think a lot of that plays back to exactly what you just said. It's about promises, and it's about what you are expected to deliver, because the community will not expect the same things out of 343 or Bungie as they do Bethesda, or as they do, CD Projekt Red. And I think that Travis really is onto something when it comes to the hype train and when you release it. Because the number one example that comes to my mind is Elder Scrolls 6. People have been saying Elder Scrolls 6 for years and years and years, and yet we get just another Skyrim edition, but this one has an extra horse. And that's what's led to a couple of interesting things, because on the one hand, that puts our modder community and modding of games into a whole new realm, doing amazing things, and in a lot of cases doing work for these companies for free. But on the other side of things, you look at studios, Bethesda as an example, or whatever they are now. They are expected to have two different things: a massive, compelling story set in an open world, and amazing graphics. That's what they do. If you do not have those things, you will fail. And it's not a fair comparison to somebody that's going to release, I don't know, Modern Warfare. You look at every Modern Warfare, the story's not even relevant in those games anymore. They just want epic graphics, and they want precision gameplay. I think a lot of
those styles boil down into competition. I mean, Call of Duty really is it's a competition-based game. So you want sharp graphics, obviously you want precise controls. Those are the two big ones for that. Obviously a compelling storyline and voice choices largely have fallen by the wayside. Now, granted, Call of Duty can still come out with a banger storyline every once in a while. Like, they really can slip in a good, compelling arc. It's never going to be what the focus of the game is, because again, it's all about that competitive player versus player atmosphere that Call of Duty is widely known for.
Yeah, it's definitely gone more competitive than it ever was before. I do think it's still, I still think the story's still there for some of it. It's not as good as it used to be, obviously, but it is still there a little bit. They seem to be going back to it a bit more. I've read. I haven't bought the last few because I can't take the online gameplay with it. It's just crazy the way they do the online game. If I play a bunch of matches well in a row, then all of a sudden I'm playing with people that are way above my skill level. They need to set the system up just a little bit better. So it takes a couple things into account. It's got to evolve a little bit. Even the pro players that play the game have said stuff about it, but just to also get on a little bit more like delays to games. So some other games have been delayed. One that really kind of bothers me, but I'm curious to see what happens, is Starfield. With that one, the reason I'm kind of shocked with it and thinking about it is, if everyone remembers No Man's Sky, that was a super hyped game in the same style as Starfield. And it came out to horrendous reviews. And if I remember correctly, glitches and problems like that. It got a lot better. Was that Travis?
Rough release. Well, there was the studio overpromised in regards to No Man's Sky on what they delivered. you could go back and watch the videos of when they first started talking about it and then what the gameplay was like on release, which is fine to see some of that stuff not make it into the final cut, but a lot of this was just blatant features that they said were going to exist that really didn't until they got it patched in.
But what bothers me is that with Starfield being of a similar style with billions of worlds or whatever, they should have kind of had an idea as to what they were getting themselves into, to know what was going to happen. So I'd be curious. I'd love to interview anybody that works there, or even just have a chat with them, because I'm just curious, are they delaying it because they're worried of No Man's Sky, in the sense of people are going to think of them like that game? Are they concerned at all, like with that being bunched in with their release? And so they're going to push everything back and try to make it not perfect, of course, but a lot better than what it is, so they don't do that kind of mistake, especially because No Man's Sky's picked up a lot. It's gotten a lot more popular now. I myself play it because it's a lot cheaper to buy now after all the issues it had when it started. So, and I've enjoyed it. Space games are awesome, flying around your own little cheesy ship and stuff. So I'd love to hear about, like, if the delays with Starfield will keep happening because they're comparing themselves to No Man's Sky.
Well, and I think that you really hit the nail on the head on a lot of that. You know, we're looking at this announcement, and the numbers finally came back because we're in 2023 now, where the game delays in 2022 just set new records. And before that, there were actually a lot of claims that the game delays in 2021 set new records, and it was this crazy year for game delays. And then, of course, the key detail being that Cyberpunk 2077 released December 10th, 2020. And so Cyberpunk had such a terrible release, in my opinion only, because they were forced to hit a deadline for the holiday season, that every company out there said, nope, no more, we're out, we're going to delay, we're going to make sure that does not happen to us. And when it comes to Starfield, I think you're exactly right. I think No Man's Sky's release is going to affect how they handle that game, what they want to do. I think Star Citizen is going to be a very similar affair. Star Citizen has gotten so much attention about how they went about doing things, and game delays and game add-ons and how it works, that any space game that's going to talk about open world exploration, open universe, fly your own ship, suddenly has to compete with already existing ill will, preconceived notion of a failure. And me and Travis both played Elite Dangerous extensively. I love Elite Dangerous. Absolutely beautiful game. But I dread patch days on Elite Dangerous, because every time they updated or patched, no telling what was going to break. It could have been anything. And so I think that Starfield is kind of doing the same thing. I mean, Starfield got pushed back, of course, to this ambiguous first half of 2023, which is fine for me. I think I agree with Travis. 6 months is a fine kind of hype window. Even a year in certain cases. But now Starfield has delayed and pushed themselves beyond that hype train window, and they're putting themselves in the danger zone.
See, my problem is this is a AAA title. I get it, delays are okay, but we're getting to the point now where I'm spending a lot of money on one video game. Yes, I want it to come out correct, but if you give me a release date, that product, I'm well within my right to expect it in a timely manner. I think we're getting to the point now where everybody just keeps pushing it back, and a lot more people are going to do like Star Citizen. Look at Baldur's Gate 3. I bought it eons ago because supposedly the full release was going to happen sometime. It still isn't happened yet, I don't think. I'm pretty sure it's still on schedule for later this year, but I think a lot more games now, to avoid getting in trouble for having problems, and instead of shifting release dates as much, are going to start going to these like Star Citizen, where you play while they're developing it, and Baldur's Gate 3, you play while they're developing it. I think some of the companies are going to start doing that more to avoid backlash and stuff like that from people like us.
Baldur's Baldur's Gate 3 has really felt more like an episodic release as new content and chapters come out. It's starting to feel very episodic because I'm not seeing a massive update in anything mechanically speaking for that game because I play it as well. So
I don't think that other than like classes and stuff like that randomly. I think it's mostly been
they've added extra like story missions and stuff. So you're past what their original release was as far as overall storyline. So like I said, giving me that episodic feel.
It's just weird. Like we'll have to wait and see, man. I think a lot more big titled games that are going to be open are going to start switching to that mode though, where it's just you pay for it now for this full price because you buy it at full price, Travis. I did to play it early.
I picked it up on a Steam sale.
Oh, okay. So yeah. Well, regardless, like you got it on sale, but it's still out there for full price, even though the game isn't released yet. So they're making their money while they're doing it. And if companies want to do that, that's something I would be okay with. If for some reason you're not big enough to have the funds to complete the game to what we want, if you want to release it and then also let us know though, hey, this is a game that we will continue to build on and stuff. Like Star Citizens needed the funding that they've gotten from players to progress to what they're at. So I'm very much more understanding of that than releasing like constantly, oh, well, we're going to push it back. We're going to push it back. It's going to be another 6 months. Like that type of stuff's irritating.
So let me ask you this to kind of close us out here. When it comes to AAA development, do you think that it would be better if they did not release or tease or announce a game until they were close to that polished release date? That way, if they push back, we don't know. Or should they take a stance similar to indie games and let us play during development and give us early access?
If you think, and the developers would know this, the people working that are going to work on this game would know this. If you realistically, like they put out for Cyberpunk, they knew they weren't going to hit that date, the people making the game. If you're a development team and you know that, I mean, it should be more the indie style, play while you develop and things like that, than it is to give a release date. But if you want to hype a game up, like it's fine to do that and just don't give a release date. Like we know right now about a bunch of games that are currently in development with no release dates. Like there's an open world Star Wars game I haven't heard the name of yet or anything, but they've released that information and are getting me excited for it without giving me a date. Like you could give breadcrumbs. You don't have to come out and be like, well, I've got this super awesome game and it's gonna make it so you can morph into Power Rangers and you can unmorph and call Zords and you can do these things. I don't need all that. Just give me the breadcrumbs as it's developed. Like, all right, well, I'm EA and I got the rights to this franchise. We're looking at developing this game. And then as it goes along, they let us know, well, we've decided it's going to be an open world game. All right. And now in this open world, 3 months later, they might be like, well, we've messed with it a little bit. And we figured out we could do Jedis in a very refined manner that makes sense in the world. We've worked on the story and developed the story, like things like that. Like you don't have to, even though people want the information, you can tease us. Like that's still a thing that can be done. You don't need to know everything right away. So I just think it's the way they release the info.
What about you, Travis?
Give me the secret project release date things. Those are the ones that I like. Where it's like, hey, we're working on something special for you gamers. We know you're going to love it. It's going to be in this universe. And like Eric said, don't give me a date. Don't even give me a title. Don't tell me what it is. Just tell me it's like, hey, we're working on a new racing game. Just give me a genre or whatever. Be like, oh, okay, like neat. Once you hit that beta and alpha testing phase, you're like, hey, check it out. In 6 months, you're going to get this game, and we're doing beta and alpha testing right now, and look at how great it is. Because that's plenty of time, which, again, even if you need to push it back a couple of months, I'm not going to be devastated because I haven't been waiting 2 years for this thing to come out. It's okay. It's okay to hold on to that date. Keep that, put it in your pocket. Obviously have a goal to shoot for, but don't put yourself into a pickle where you're guaranteeing a release date that you're going to end up inevitably missing. give me, not necessarily the breadcrumbs like Eric was saying, but just, give me the secret project. Hey, we're working on Project Flightbird. And you're like, that sounds
Blue
weird.
Harvest.
Yeah, and like Project Flightbird turns out to be a horse racing game or whatever that had nothing to do with its secret project title. I love shit like that. Like, I still get hyped because I know the game studios that I enjoy playing from are working on something, but at the same time, I'm not like, well, this game X better have all of these things that I absolutely love about the world, or it's not going to be enough. So keeps me from having my expectations go out of the world. It keeps them from being in a hard spot of like saying, hey, we've delayed this game for like yet another year once it's all said and done. Bethesda being a big culprit with teasing Elder Scrolls 6 sometime, and I think like, was it 5 years ago they teased Elder Scrolls 6, some astronomical range ago.
Rockstar's another one that's notorious with teas and stuff, and but I'll give them though, they release a game though, like when they mess around, they do definitely give you a lot of what they say, so you can't get too mad at them, but they definitely hint at stuff ahead of time and have pushback dates and stuff.
Yeah, it looks like Elder Scrolls 6 got released or announced, not released, excuse me, in early 2018. And so 5 years. 5 years been waiting on that one.
Coming up on 5 years.
All right, guys, we're going to have to round this one up. For our listeners, obviously this has been your Breaking Rift. The Rift this time being that 2022 had record-setting numbers of delayed games, and you just listened to 3 random dudes and their opinions on that. Travis, you got anything to close us out?
Other than fact, Eric?
All right, real quick, everybody, just so you know, we're going to keep doing these. We got them on our YouTube now, so make sure you're checking us out on YouTube. The best way to get to that is going to be to go to our Facebook, the group, Heroes of the Nerdverse, or to check out our Twitter pages. You got at HNerdverse for our Heroes of the Nerdverse page, or our at CTN_podcast. That's going to be anything directly with probably the riffs and with our podcast. So if you want to get info about those, CTN is probably going to be your best place for these two things. And getting links to anything. With our YouTube, we're not a big name yet, so we don't have the easy to find thing on YouTube. So the fastest way for you to get to us is going to be through CTN. Make sure you're checking us out. Podcast that released, go check that out. Indie games huge, we love them. But yeah, go ahead, Travis.
And with that, this has been another Rift in the Nerdverse. We are crossing the Nerdverse. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us.